Before I start, I want to do like a 10-second moment of silence for victims of sexual violence. So, what I want to do is talk about the Japanese anime Noir, and I want to talk a little bit about the character Altena in this series. And for those of you who don't know, I've been doing video essays on the Japanese anime Noir to become a better filmmaker and writer. Like, there was a class in the 1990s where people watched Pulp Fiction, and a college professor spent like 9 hours breaking down every shot, every scene. So it inspired me to do that for Noir and other animes. Unfortunately, it's extremely time consuming. Like, honestly, it's almost like watching an episode and spending, about like 8 or 9 hours on each one, really. And when you work, a lot of hours at your job, like 70 hours a week, you don't have that much time to kind of get to it. So, I decided to watch the last episode of Noir during my vacation to Dallas because, I have a very light schedule. So, and also too, this anime means a lot to me. So the last episode, I decided to watch it last night because, I really want to make sure that I do it justice. And I watch it at a time when I'm emotionally ready because I don't want to be just crammed and stressed out with work and life and be like, oh, well, I can't do it the justice, because my heart is really in this anime because it's a very powerful one to me. So I do want to talk about the character Altena, and I want to talk a little bit about her psychology. So in the anime Noir, she is a high priestess, and she believes that Noir is three assassins who are to go through a bunch of trials through their lives, and eventually what happens is that they're going to arrive at her manor, and at her manor they're going to have a battle royale, so only two remain, and then those two ones become the true Noir. And in the sold out religion and in her belief, she believes that the true Noir, their goal really is that mankind is evil, mankind is cruel. So Jesus Christ died for the sins of mankind, so everybody is forgiven by God. But in the Soldat and in Altena's belief, they believe that Noir are two assassins, and their goal is to do more sins and evil deeds to show that mankind isn't as bad because they are a worser evil. So it's almost like, Jesus Christ in an opposite way, really, So, there's a lot of things to say about Altena and her psychology. And I think that like one of the first things that I will talk about is that she is a victim of sexual abuse. They show her childhood, and she's in a war-torn country. She's walking alone. She looks emaciated. And you hear a bunch of screams all over the place. You see a bunch of dead bodies all over the place. And then also, too, they show like some colorized, like still frame footages. So maybe what happened was that her parents died in war, or her mother died protecting her, or something like that, really. But disturbingly, there's a scene in the anime where she's found by a soldier. He has a grin on his face. He takes her to a room. She's laying on a bed. He gets in bed with her. You hear the bed creak. You see some very sexually charged images. You see him put his foot down on her doll, and the foot is touching where the vagina area of the doll is. It could be a metaphor for violation. And then also dolls represent innocence. So it's obviously, and soldiers represent a loss of innocence because, they've seen so much violence, really. So it's almost like the loss of, an uninnocent figure crushing an innocent figure. And then the other thing about it is that you see like the gun, and it had a white shimmer on it. So like guns are always represented as phallic. A white shimmer could represent, like sperm coming out of his penis after an ejaculation, really. And then she says the lines, "If love can kill people, hate can save." So it makes me think that, she spent her entire life really just from that traumatic experience, having her religious dogma. Maybe she's trying to find meaning in this world. Maybe she believes in Murphy's Law, like things happen for a reason. So maybe the sexual violation that happened to her tells her that, that it was preordained, or maybe like she probably wants to feel like a religion. Maybe she's also a religious figure or a religious zealot, being like, okay, well, I want to have that same power and the same control. So I'm going to become a high priestess. I'm going to use my power to be a prophecy priestess, and or create a prophecy, or fulfill the Noir prophecy, because I want to feel like everything in my life is preordained, really. And ultimately, her goal is that she wants to be killed by the true Noir prophecy, so that way she can kind of go down as like a last like sacrifice to the Noir prophecy, almost like I can't think of like a religious text, but a lot of times, in certain cultures, like, for a king to become a king, they have to kill like like the prior king, or in like Aztec cultures, for some rituals, they have to kill and sacrifice people, and those people are highly regarded for their sacrifice or remembered for their sacrifice. Like you died as a passage or a right for somebody to gain a larger power, really. So I think, with Altena, maybe in her image, in her head, she wants to be exactly. There is this image of Noir from like 100,000 years ago, like two women holding swords, and they are dressed in like Greek and Roman clothing, like toga, and then also there's like a maiden in the middle of them. Like she probably wants to be that maiden figure, and that maiden looks a lot like Mary Magdalene in that tapestry. So she's almost like trying to live up to that prophecy of this Noir that's coming in 2001, not like 1001. So definitely her psychology really is about, finding a life purpose, or feeling like maybe like traumatic things happen to her because it's part of, God's plan or something like that, really. And there are people who go through a lot of just, really traumatic things and really painful things in their lives. And they do have a psychology of believing that, things, happen for a reason. And then, the truth is that they're just delusional to the fact that, life is life, really. There's good, there's evil. When evil things happen, it's not because it's by God or whatever. It's because, people, there are people who are inherently evil, and then in some people's psychology, they act on very bad impulses, and they do horrible things without thinking. And we all understand this, like I worked at a store that was robbed by its own security guards, and it wasn't ordained by God that I was going to develop PTSD. What happened was, the store was robbed because people were being bullied, and they wanted to just get back at people who were bullying them. The police came in and aimed guns at me and other people, and they were smiling and snickering. But I don't think that it was like God's plan to put me through PTSD, really. I think it was just a bunch of people making bad choices. And also, it was during a time in 2010 when I'm shooting brown people, I'm mixed race, shooting people who look black, was what was happening a lot, really. So there really wasn't dissection of a lot of dissection of police brutality and police harassment. And then also too, that wasn't preordained for God to give me PTSD intentionally. But there are some people who cope with traumatic events by saying it's part of God's plan, really. And unfortunately, some people come out better and some people come out worse. Like I've known people who've been victims of sexual assault, and they decide to say, okay, well, you know what, it made me closer to God because now I'm very religious now, or now I became a righteous person, or it taught me the power of forgiveness. No, I don't believe that, because I think then that way you can kind of almost justify horrible things happening to you, or saying, there's a reason behind it, outside of somebody being evil and somebody only caring about their sexual gratification. And it's really that, some people believe that, God put a challenge to people's life like that. But no, I don't believe that. I believe that there's good and evil in everybody. There's impulses, there's desires that people have, either for revenge, either for sexual gratification, either for money or whatever. And people act on impulses. That's not every human being, but then that's why, sexual violence happens, or people get mad and rob their job to, have that feeling of revenge, really. So when I think of Altena, I think that's kind of like her big downfall, is that she believes that the trauma that happened to her was preordained. And I also feel that she wants to live a life of feeling like, everything in her life is preordained and she has the power to make other people feel that way, because she realized that approach. I think another problem with her character, and I think this is one of the strengths of this entire series, is it talks about fate, and it also talks about power and control of people. And I feel that this is one of the central themes of Noir, really, because at the very end, what Altena wants Marielle and Kirka to do is kill her, so Altena feels like she's part of this, like prophecy, really. And then also, too, the person that she controls her entire life, the person that she has the most control over is Chloe, and Chloe dies feeling like she's part of, like, the trial and the ritual as well, really, so I think that, Altena feels power in controlling people. But to get back to the other side is that Marielle and Kirika grieve and they feel sad about the people that they killed. They've lost a lot of people in their lives. But one thing that Altena cannot control is how they process that. And I think that what happened with Marielle and Kirika is that they met a lot of nice people in their lives. Kirika met Milos in episode 13. They know about Nazaroff in episode 6, the guy who killed a bunch of people, but he wants to atone for his sins. And then they also have each other. And then, Marielle has her mother, Uncle Claude. Odette was in Kirika's life. So I think they've been surrounded by people and by deaths that mean something to them. And then they also trauma bond. So I think that all those things give them a sense of humanity. Like, like life, that life is precious, really. And where Altena believes that life is preordained, really. So when people die in the eyes of Altena, it's almost like it's part of a greater plan, or it's all part of like a sacrifice for Noir. And Marielle and Kirika don't believe that. They believe that everybody has free will. They also believe that, you take responsibility for who you are. And then also, too, that if somebody believes that you're a prophet and whatever, they don't really know you. It's just like they have their own perspective of how it's almost like some people have a perspective of others, and they have like a like probably like some thoughts about how other people think, but you don't know how other people think and stuff like that. So I think with Altena, she's just not happy to get her way, really, when Kirika and Marielle go against what she wants to happen, which was for them to shoot her dead, really. And then Altena ends up actually shooting Kirika, and Kirika stands up to her by saying, you don't know who we really are, really. And that's kind of how it ends, really, where, Altena dies, but she doesn't, but she may like kind of like be delusional and believe, hey, you know what, in the end of the day, it's not how things turned out in my way. I mean, it turned out 50-50 for her. She ends up dying, becoming a sacrifice in her own eyes, but she gets killed by people who are not saying that we're part of the prophecy or anything like that. Pardon me, I'm in a hotel, so people are cleaning. But it also reminds me of like another personal story that I had this friend Anna that I was in love with, and I really felt that I trauma bonded because, we both had very rough childhood. She mentioned that she went through sexual abuse growing up, and I also mentioned that, I've been through different types of abuse, and other things like that. So there was like a trauma bonding. And I remember like at one point in my life, I kind of thought that because, this is somebody I really loved and cared about, it was like love at first sight for me. I felt like, we were destined to be together. Like I had dreams of us holding hands and running on waterfalls and other things like that. And just, feeling like that she was the perfect woman, and types of things like that. But I also remembered when I put those feelings on her, it kind of freaked her out a little bit. And then I also learned, and then I remember saying something to her like, you know me more than any other person because I can only be happy around you. And this was like years and years ago when I had a lot of depression and, antisocial issues. And I remember how also at that time she was seeing somebody else, really. So we had a friendship, but she ended her friendship because, she, for a few reasons. And one of the reasons was, importantly, that I was just a little delusional in seeing our relationship, in a different light. She saw us as, maybe like once, she saw us as maybe like small friends, really. She didn't like see it as, you know, like, how do you have these powerful feelings, and I kind of just said intuition, really. But no, it's two people have to bond and grow, and it has to be a healthy relationship. And I didn't see it like that. And I take accountability, I take responsibility, and I've apologized. And I've worked hard to just be like, okay, we have powerful feelings about somebody, but ultimately we don't know the inner thinking of somebody. And then also, too, we may find somebody that we love and care about and think that, oh, well, it's going to turn out this way when it never does, really, and that's important because, there are a lot of people, just like Altena, like she believes that death and fate is preordained. The same way I feel like, some relationships of mine could have been preordained and they didn't turn out that way. So, it's just important to understand that there are people who believe that things are preordained because they're just in their thoughts and their emotions, or maybe they go through some trauma and just say, okay, well, what, this time's going to work out, really. But living a life based around like thinking that things are preordained or a prophecy is not a good idea, because you don't know the inner workings of people. And then also, too, I think that with Altena, and this is another thing that happens with a lot of religions, and it's a very human thing, is that she justifies all of her bad behavior. Like she ruined the lives of Kirika, Marielle, and Chloe, and she's always saying that it's like for a prophecy, it's preordained, it's all this, and like all the people that have gotten killed throughout the series. Like I think that, I'm not sure how many deaths are in the series. You would have to like count every single one, but I would imagine the number being close to 300, and really around like 300 people, I would guess. Like around 300, 350 people probably died in the series, but all those lives, being killed, it just does tell you. Again, she kind of feels that because she's a religious zealot, or they all died for the Noir prophecy, that it's all like kind of just, really. The same way, people initiated, like crusades or attacks on countries, or people killing people for religious reasons. Like you see like how, during the crusades and, like a lot of like the wars in Europe, through like the centuries, were all about killing anybody with different religious beliefs in the name of God, really. And then also when, they started to invade it and kill like indigenous people in America, in the Americas, same thing. It was all for, that mentality that, hey, there's a divine purpose to this, God's sending us to do that. But, people can use religion or think that there's a destiny or preordained things to think that, their behavior is justified or it's serving a greater purpose. And I think that's one of the themes of Noir is no, that's a dangerous belief. And I think it all stems from Altena just saying that, hey, well, because I got sexually assaulted, maybe that's part of a greater plan, really, So she ultimately turns, like I said, she turns what happened to her, justifying the behavior of that soldier, to justifying, the behavior that she does to cause, a greater, problem in the world. And I ultimately will say that I think that, like I've said about the series, that I really think that they should have really developed Altena a lot better. And like I said, it should have been like 30 episodes, just to give Altena some more time. Like, show everybody, like, how did she come from a soldier in a war-torn country to a priestess. And I think that that's kind of one of the biggest weaknesses of the show, because I think that Chloe and Altena are very underdeveloped. Like, you don't really see their psychology. So I think, as I said, if you do 30 to 40 episodes, it would have been a stronger series. And I also know in Japanese culture, like, like, if you look at any Japanese anime, like a majority of them sexualizes women. So you see women with big breasts, you see panty shots, you see women like just sexualized. Like, there's not a lot of animes, in my opinion, that talk about sexual violence against women. And I think one of the biggest tragedies of the noir anime is that it could have been an anime that explored themes of sexual violence and how that changes a person, impacts their psychology. Like Altena could have been the character like that. And I think if they did that, then bam, this would have been like Evangelion, or Cowboy Bebop, or one of those other anime series that would have been like the one of the best in anime history. It would have been remembered for generations. But I think that really not having that really takes Noir from like an A+ legendary anime to something around a B-. So it's really unfortunate that they didn't like go down that direction really. And like I said, I understand that there were issues when they produced this anime. Like there's stories that they were really rushed. They had really tight deadlines. They did some stupid things with this series where I believe there was a story that they went around the world to these different countries. Like New York, in New Jersey in the U.S. and then they also went to parts of Europe and parts of Taiwan and just to send their animators just to get ideas. But when you do something like that, then you don't really have that much of a budget. But also too that I believe like the reason why they do 26 episodes, if I'm correct, is that in Japan every other weekend you go to school. So 26 episodes is supposed to be like, okay, a new episode every week, every 2 weeks really. So 52 episodes in a year. So so you have something that lasts an entire year, or you do like a half a year or something like that, because 6 months is a good length. But like I said, I really wish this was like 40 episodes and they developed Altena a lot more really. I think that her and Chloe and talking about their psychology, like honestly, like how Altena became a priestess, and then also how she manipulates Chloe and turns Chloe into a horrible being, and how she raised like Kirika and Marielle and Chloe from a young age, because she said that she was in parts of their lives really. So I really just think that if they kind of developed that more from her trauma, it would have been a stronger series. But it's very evidential that we all got to be good to others, because sometimes you don't really understand the domino effect that you have on people's lives, because sometimes you do something so horrible to somebody or kind of horrible, and then you don't realize the impact that you have in their lives. Like Altena going from a victim of sexual assault and being in a war-torn country to being a high priestess that's destroyed the lives of hundreds or thousands of people, all for a religious prophecy. And I've been in situations like that before. Like I remember, like from that PTSD I suffered at my job, when I got robbed. Really, I went down a self-destructive path. I hung out with a bad crowd. I got in trouble because somebody did some bad things to me, were telling some lies on me, and I had to pay my parents back, money for a lawyer. And then I remember having depression, and I remember separating from my parents for almost didn't talk to them for about 10 years because I felt that they were too cruel and harsh really. Like really, if that robbery never happened, if the workplace bullying and violence never happened at my job, I would have been in a better way really. But I remember taking a lot of my antisocial behavior on others. There is a domino effect. And I also remember I worked at a job where there was a bunch of workplace bullying, sexual harassment, other things that happened to me. And I remember becoming a bad self-destructive employee. So I think that another big lesson in Noir is ultimately, how one action, one horrible thing can lead to a person, it could lead to, a bunch of different atrocities. I think as they say, evil is not born, people are not born evil, people are created evil. And sometimes one evil action could lead to countless evil actions. So, we always have to think about what they do. Like that soldier who did that to her, to hell with him. But, if you can look at, how she turned out and all the lives and the deaths that were caused, he probably wished that he'd probably never done that. So it's unfortunate that Altena's character went through that. She's definitely a tragic villain. And part of that tragedy is that she's definitely one of the most underdeveloped characters in anime. And if she was developed, this would have been a legendary series, and definitely a series that would have done a lot and probably a lot in feminism and a lot of just, advocating the consequences of sexual violence. So it's very bad that it's brief and it's really underlooked in this series. It could have been developed a lot more, and it could have made the series a lot more better and more powerful than it already is. Going from like that B- to that A+.